Homeostasis is a concept that is integral to understanding physiology and understanding pathology. It's really, it is how the body maintains an internal environment that is relatively stable and predictable. And it also is the mechanisms by which the body reacts to outside stimuli or outside forces and remains fairly constant. For instance, your body temperature is the same whether you walk outside and it's 30 degrees and you're walking across the parking lot in heat and humidity, or in January you do the same thing and it's minus 30. That's a 60-degree shift in outside temperature. You do not get a 60-degree shift for body temperature with it. Homeostatic mechanisms are what maintains that. So there's all kinds of factors that get regulated. We call them variables. And in order to regulate them, you need to monitor them. Like, you need to know what's going on in order to maintain it. You have to be able to sense change. And this is really all controlled by the nervous system and the endocrine system. So it's a series of hormones or nerve impulses that monitor things and cause the reactions. Now, the whole thing needs a bunch of different components. You need a receptor, like a sensor that monitors the changes in the environment, internal and external environment. So it responds to the stimuli. Now, a classic example of homeostasis is the temperature in a room. We'll talk about that. In a classroom or in a room that you're sitting, there will be a thermostat on the wall, something that's going to be monitoring the air temperature in the room. If the air temperature starts to climb, then what happens is it reaches a set point, and there's a control center. There's a decision maker that says, okay, the stimuli is too high, the temperature is too high, turn on the air conditioning. And then the air conditioner comes on and cool air gets blown into the room and the temperature lowers. If the thermostat sees that the temperature has gone down too far, below a set point, then what happens is the control center says, oh, now it's too low, turn on the furnace, and warm air blows into the room. So the control center makes the decision of how to respond based on what the receptor tells it. The effector is the air conditioner or the furnace. It receives the output from the control center, and it provides the response. The response is then changes the stimuli, which is called feedback. Now, feedback can be positive or negative. The easiest one to understand is negative feedback. So really what happens is the stimulus produces a change in the variable. So the temperature in the room starts to climb because of sunlight coming through the windows. The receptor, the thermostat, senses that change. It communicates with the control center via wires, and we call these the afferent pathways. Afferent means to go towards. Uh, so anytime you see the word afferent, and we're going to see it a lot in the study of physiology, it means going towards. Think of the word affluent. Money flows towards the affluent. So the control center makes a decision as to what to do to respond to this stimuli, to this warm room. In our bodies, the control center is usually in the central nervous system, in the brain or the spinal cord. And then the control center communicates with the effector through the efferent pathway. So wires go from the control center up to the air conditioning unit and turns it on. The effector, which is in this case the air conditioner, has a response, and it's to blow cool air into the room, which then lowers the temperature of the room and brings things back into balance. A couple of things: receptors need set points. Receptors need to know when the stimulus is within normal limits and when the stimulus starts to exceed the normal limits. So it's stimulus produces the imbalance, the receptor detects the change, the afferent pathway communicates with the control center, the control center communicates with the effector via the efferent pathway, the effector has a response which brings things back into balance. Everything that I've said so far has been an example of negative feedback. Negative feedback is when the response is opposite to the shift in stimuli. So the room is getting warm, make the room cooler. Your blood pressure is going up, lower your blood pressure. You're hungry, eat. You know, it's the opposite all the time in negative feedback. Negative feedback does not comment on whether it's good or bad. It's only commenting on the direction. The response is opposite the stimulus. And it works like this. So here's an example. Body temperature rises, so temperature receptors all over your body respond to it. Information goes to the brain, the thermoregulatory centers in the brain by the afferent pathways. The efferent pathways along the nerves, the motor nerves. You go to the effectors, the sweat glands. You sweat, the sweat evaporates, body temperature falls. It goes back into balance. Body temperature falls too much, the receptors pick up on that. Afferent pathways go to the thermoregulatory center, which the efferent pathways go to the skeletal muscles, which says contract. Contracting muscles create heat, so you start to shiver, body temperature rises, and you end up back in balance. Both of those things are considered negative feedback because the effector does the opposite of the change in stimulus. Another example. We have to have the right amount of blood. So if too much blood, you have too much blood pressure. Not enough blood, you have not enough blood pressure. There's a hormone called antidiuretic hormone. So receptors sense the decreased blood volume. There's stretch receptors in the walls of some of the major arteries. They go via afferent pathways to the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus makes the pituitary gland release a hormone called antidiuretic hormone. Antidiuretic hormone causes the kidneys to reabsorb more water into the blood, you end up with more blood pressure increases, and the stimulus stops. Classic negative feedback regulated by hormones. Positive feedback is not as common, but it's just as important. In positive feedback, the response enhances the stimulus. It's in the same direction as the stimulus. So we use this when we need to cascade, when we need to have effects amplified. So the classic example of this is the release of the hormone oxytocin during labor. Another one is forming platelet plugs and blood clotting. You get a tear in a blood vessel and you start to bleed. What happens is the exposed collagen of the adventitia of the blood vessel that blood normally doesn't come into contact with causes the platelets to adhere to those collagen fibers and then release some chemicals locally. Those chemicals attract more platelets and activate those platelets, which makes them stickier, which makes them release more chemicals, which then causes more platelets, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So very quickly the clot builds and you stop bleeding. Right. When there's no more blood coming into contact with the collagen, when the plug is intact, then this positive feedback stops. Labor is the same thing. You have a contraction, which causes the release of oxytocin, which makes the next contraction stronger and sooner, which then releases more oxytocin, which then accelerates, and so you're going to cascade until there's birth. Now, I said this in the last video, homeostatic imbalance, anytime things don't get out of control and things are outside of their set points, what we have is disease. Sometimes it's just increased risk of disease, sometimes it is full-on pathology. It gets very complicated because a homeostatic imbalance in one system will affect the responses in other systems, which may cause imbalances there, and things can again cascade or get very complicated very quickly. An example would be, there's a homeostatic balance of blood sugar. If your blood sugars can't be too high or too low. If your blood sugars start to get high, then you release insulin, and insulin makes sugars either go into the cells or turn into fat or somehow get used up. They go into the liver and become glycogen. If there's something wrong with the mechanism of that insulin, whether you become resistant to the insulin, whether the cells stop responding to the insulin, or you stop making adequate amounts of insulin, then blood sugar levels will increase, and that's a homeostatic imbalance of blood sugar. When that happens, It's going to cause different osmosis in the kidneys, which means that you will pee more, which then will change your blood pressure, which then means that you will stop sending blood to the less critical areas like your skin. You'll have vasoconstriction, which then leads to skin issues and ulcers perhaps. And that's why a lot of symptoms of diabetes are really not about the blood sugar, but about peripheral vascular issues. Sometimes these things can just start to cascade in a positive feedback sort of way, out of control until death happens. We're going to see, and we'll talk about what I call the death cascade. You're going to see it in clinical practice in the hospitals, how when people are admitted due to some pathology, oftentimes trying to cope with that pathology and the drugs that are used to try and bring things back into a homeostatic balance cause imbalances in other systems, and eventually the body just loses control of all its homeostatic balances and just ceases. An old quote of mine is, all of physiology is really summed up in the story Goldilocks. Physiology is baby bear, just right. Pathology is mama bear and papa bear, too hot, too cold, too hard, too soft, something outside of the homeostatic boundaries and homeostatic limits. Pathology is homeostatic imbalance, physiology is homeostatic balance.